Вынести. Надо вынести. Здоров, просто все. Может она спасибо. Нравится.
Wasserstoffaktien stehen nach wie vor im Hauptfokus vieler Anleger und auch die Regierung ist umgeschwenkt.
Chopin, the great melodist. He's always good for a bel canto tune or Polish dance rhythm, isn't he? Tune or Polish dance rhythm, isn't he? It's safe to say that the last movement of Chopin's Second Sonata shows us a different side to the composer, one not always fully appreciated. In addition to his well-known lyrical gifts, he was also a great innovator, especially when it came to harmony, be it the opulent coda of his Baccarat or the pervading chromaticism of his final mazurka. It was Chopin's inventions which helped map the harmonic terrain for future generations of composers.
Ну, нам смотришь уже.
Of all his works, though, the finale of the Second Sonata stands out as being particularly forward-looking. After three more or less conventional movements, a sonata form, a scherzo, and a certain funeral march, this final fourth movement comes across as a bit of a shock. A single line played by both hands an octave apart hurtles breathlessly up and down the keyboard for the movement's entire short duration. With no tempo, textural, dynamic variability, the music seems to blur into a single undifferentiated tangle of notes. The work's themes, architecture, and tonality are rendered hidden, which led Ligeti to claim that this was probably nation. With no tempo, textural, dynamic variability, the music seems to blur into a single undifferentiated tangle of notes. The work's themes, architecture, and tonality are rendered hidden, which led Ligeti to claim that this was probably the first atonal piece in the history of music. That's quite the claim. Could this really be atonal? Well, surely not in the 12-tone row sense of the word. We are in the key, B-flat minor. It's just that it's often quite hard to tell. At the beginning, for example, we're completely adrift, with a first theme, if you can call it that, based on unstable half-diminished and diminished seventh chords. We quickly arrive at the tonic with just as stable half-diminished and diminished seventh chords. We quickly arrive at the tonic and just as quickly move on from it, and you'd be forgiven for missing it entirely considering the abundance of passing and chromatic notes which dilute this all-important chord. Soon after, we have passages like this, formed of chromatically descending triads. Now, chromaticism is hardly rare in romantic piano music. What is rather rare, however, is to have a chromatic line where every other note is dislodged from its usual position and shunted down the octave. Such a line is woven through this angular passage, yielding some immensely dissonant intervals on strong beats of the bar. Again, you'd be forgiven for losing the tonal thread here, if we ever grasped it in the first place. Another reason why it's so hard to detect a prevailing tonality is simply that there's no vertical harmony. In so much of Chopin's music, the left hand is assigned the role of accompanist and provides chordal support for the right hand. As a result, no matter how complicated a certain right hand line might get, it's usually always clear how it fits within the broader harmonic context. But as we know with this finale, both hands play the same single line of music. We lack any sort of accompaniment which explicitly spells out the chords for us, and instead must follow harmonic progressions that are articulated horizontally over the course of several notes. This isn't such a problem when the music's formed of broken chords, but when it's formed of scales, which it very often is, it once again becomes tonally disorientated. Take this hair-raising sequence as an example, littered with dreaded double flats. With precious few broken chords to go on, it's only through highlighting certain notes within the scales, emphasized either by meter or contour, that we can begin to uncover the harmonic scaffold. Whether you can hear the scaffold in performance is a question we'll get onto in a moment. Regardless, it seems to indicate a modulation to the relative major, D-flat. Initially in diminished seventh territory, the music passes through the Neapolitan. Then, after the briefest and most tenuous of dominant preparations, we arrive in D-flat for the work's set. Right, now back to the question of whether we can actually hear any of the underlying harmonic framework, because this is central, I think, to what Ligeti meant when he described the piece as atonal. Well, a lot of it comes down to the performer, for the choice of tempo, dynamic, articulation, and pedal will all profoundly impact the level of detail a listener can pick up. Play it more slowly, and the fog dissipates, revealing harmony but also melodic fragments that were hitherto concealed. who've analysed the piece may feel confident that they can hear the harmonic framework. Personally, I think I can, at least more than I used to. Bear in mind, though, that analysis can dramatically colour the listening experience. When I listen, it's possible that I'm filling in the gaps, perceiving a more harmonically coherent piece than is actually resonating from the piano strings. This work might best be described, then, as theoretically tonal, but experientially atonal. Or maybe I'm just overthinking it. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. How does analysis inform or distort your listening? And is a piece coherent even if you can't hear that coherence? If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. I'd love to build a little community here and connect with like-minded people. Thanks, and see you soon.
Beaucoup de personnes ne le savent pas, mais le meilleur moyen de gagner de l'argent dans les cryptos n'est pas d'aller analyser les cryptos une par une. Ce n'est pas non plus...
Да. Меня там наоборот.
What is just
Чесночандр. Чесночанский. Чесночевич. Ну и чё? Где это? А, думаешь, это... Ну чё это? Ну чё это? Ой, ёшкин. Ой, иди от тебя налево, блин. Ладно. Тот самый легендарный.
Wenn du mehr als 10.000 Euro auf einem Bankkonto hast und nicht willst, dass das Geld bald in Flammen aufgeht.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. My guest today is Pat Metheny. I've been wanting to interview Pat since the beginning of my channel. Pat, it's a pleasure to see you. Now, I want to say, let's see, I met you backstage on October 10th, 1981. You were playing in Ithaca, New York. I think it was called the Strand Theater with the group. You were 26 years old back then. and I was a sophomore in college. I saw you play, well, many times with the group. I saw you with Charlie Hayden and Billy Higgins at the Village Vanguard in 1984, which was a phenomenally great show. I absolutely love your guitar playing. You're a huge influence on me, and I have many questions to ask you.
Okay, I'm very, very happy to be here with you, Rick. I mean, your thing is really special, very unique. You're doing an incredible service to musicians, to your listeners and followers. It's, you know, I mean, everybody I know is like following your thing because it's really interesting to look at music in this detailed way. And you're like in a very unique sort of position as a musician to understand so many aspects of it, to then be able to explain a lot of things to a lot of people that maybe they hadn't thought of before, and it's great. So I'm very, very happy to be here with you today.
Cool.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to go back to December of 1975. I know you have a great memory, Pat. When I interviewed Gary Burton, he talked about making the Dreams So Real record music of Carla Bley, the 2 days I'm making a record, because back then ECM records were 2 days, I guess, right? And then Jocko came over, and Bright Side's Life was going to happen the next 2 days, he said.
Correct.
So Jocko arrives that day, and you're getting ready to do this, and you're making this record. It's your first solo record. Tell me about that. What was it like? What was the studio like? Give me the vibe.
Well, you know, it's great that we're starting with Gary because so many things for me are kind of really informed by the significance that Gary had on my life. First as a fan, you know, the Gary Burton Quartet of the late 60s, as much as people talk about Bitches Brew and stuff that happened a little bit in, you know, later in 69, 70, you know, back in 67, 68, Gary's band was kind of already pushing the edge of what was kind of going to be culturally finessable within the world of improvised music. And, you know, that band was like, that was the Beatles for me, that band. Right. And I had all their records, followed it really closely, along with everything else that I was following, which was, you know, my early years around Kansas City. I was very lucky to play with great older musicians, guys who could really play, and most of that was kind of in the vernacular of the time, you know, playing organ trio type stuff, and, you know, CTI type stuff was very popular then, and you know, so I was kind of hanging in that zone, but Gary's thing was something that definitely had nothing to do with what the Kansas City thing was, but I love that stuff. So, you know, the dream gig for me would have been to be in Gary Burton Quartet, you know, I mean, that would have been like being asked to replace George Harrison or something, you know, and that's what ended up happening very quickly. I was asked to perform on a festival in Wichita, Kansas. I got to play a couple tunes with Gary, got to know him, and then a bunch of other stuff, but very quickly I was in the Gary Burton Quintet, then Quartet. And when I joined Gary's band, we made a record for ECM, and the idea came up that maybe I would make a record, which at the time I was 19, and for me that was like, yeah, let's do that tomorrow, you know? And Gary, being the person that he is, had, I think, felt like maybe he got pushed into making his own records a little too soon. He started making records on his own, I think, when he was 16 or 17.
Yes, really early.
And he, to me, was like, you know, you should wait until you can make the record that may be the only record you ever make, because it might be. And, you know, also I was playing in his band every night. He was a very tough leader in a good way. But there would be several hours of conversation after almost every night. You're doing this, you're not doing that, you're doing this. But then he would go out, and not just him, Swallow too, and Moses would basically do everything he just said that I should do. And of course they were right. So in that year I really developed by being around them. And Gary's thing also was the material that I had at that time, because I was submitting whatever I was writing to him. He just felt like it was fine, but it wasn't, you know, that one record, because I may only make one record yet. And he kind of took it upon himself to let me bring tunes. He and I would do demos in his basement, He's
Yeah,
really
you told me
good
that,
piano
actually.
player. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember when I wrote the tune Bright Size Life,
Mhm.
took it over there, said, okay, now you've got the first tune on the record. That's what you should be doing. Follow that thread, because that, I don't know what that is. He said, everything else you brought in, I know what that is. He said, that one, that's something else. And the thing is, for me too, that tune crystallized something, which was this idea of you got to be able to play on the changes, you got to be able to really deal with like Coltrane stuff, you got to be able to hang in all 12 keys on any standard, you got to be able to do all that,